Okay, we're on. I'm having a chat. You're in Everett, right? As we speak?
Everett, Washington, yes.
Everett, Washington. Silly me. I lived in Seattle. I didn't realize some people have to know that Everett is in Washington. Uh, I'm speaking with American composer Richard E. Brown. We're going to call you Rick from here on out. Rick Brown, about your 2022 Novona Records CD release, Voices of the Night and Other Works for Orchestra. And this really has, as many people know now, I spend the day of the interview just listening, taking notes, creating questions, and just kind of being with the CD. This one is very, very interesting. This CD that you have put together. I realized as I finished listening that this has a little bit of kind of everything in terms of who you are and what you've done, where you've been, where you're going. It's quite wonderful. Let me just give the titles of these. This is orchestral music played by great orchestras in Europe, Bratislava Philharmonic. I better wait till I get down there so I don't screw it up. But anyway, here's the repertoire for everybody who's kind of interested. American music, mind you. This is an important thing. This is an American composer here. Good stuff. Voices of the Night, a nocturnal fantasy for orchestra, composed in 1973 and I guess kind of revised in 2013. Is that right,
Yeah.
Rick? With the Royal Scottish National Orchestra, David Morgan's conducting. Wonderful performances, all of these, wonderful. Then next on the list is this wonderful concerto for clarinet and chamber orchestra, 1973, and then did you revise it in 2013? Something like that?
In 2012 or
Oh,
thereabout, I really took it apart.
oh yeah, because your note says that you really kind of
Yeah,
like, this is the work of a
it,
kid from
I wrote
70.
it in 1973 as a graduate composition student at Florida State, and
Yeah,
it was my doctoral dissertation. And it was played there once,
of
and
course.
then I like to say it fell into the dustbin of academic obscurity for the next 4 decades
That'll
until
do. You probably could have put it in 3 words, but never mind. Yeah, exactly. It happens. But it's a wonderful concerto. I'm a clarinetist. I don't know if you know this.
no.
I'm a little ashamed of it because I, of course, dumped the clarinet the minute I found that conducting was easier. Ha, let's laugh. Ha ha. Uh, but Richard Stoltzman. I started at California Institute of the Arts. I was a clarinetist conductor because I started conducting at 16. But there was that moment, where you have to decide, and I said, enough of making clarinet reads. Are you crazy, Richard? So I know from what you're writing for clarinet. So this wonderful concerto for clarinet and chamber orchestra. We'll talk about it a little more later. Paisano Suite from 2012. As I told you off camera, I completely misread the name Paisano Suite. I'm going to let you tell us all about that experience because this suite is completely different in character than everything else on the CD, and that is fascinating. Paisano Suite from 2012. Janacek Philharmonic, one of the great recording orchestras at Parma, and others use that orchestra all the time. And then the last piece, expansions for orchestra, 1975, and then you kind of reworked it, or did it? I can't remember. Did it start as a band piece and then
It was an orchestra piece
orchestra piece?
from the beginning. It was written as a companion piece to a band composition called Expansions for Wind and Percussion.
Oh, so that was different then, because I listened
It's
to
a different
expansions for wind.
composition.
Aha! See, I'm an idiot. Okay, very interesting. So that explains it then. So the band piece was 1975, and then expansions to the orchestra.
The band composition was 1974, actually.
Okay. And then the orchestral piece was 1975. The orchestral
Yeah,
expansions. Okay. Again, Janacek Philharmonic. Now let's get to you. We haven't yet properly introduced you, Dr. Richard E. Brown, native of New York State. But I know because I read your your note. We're not talking New York City. We're talking the hinterlands, right? Which is
Adirondack,
wonderful. Which also is. Did you say Adirondack?
Adirondacks. Yeah.
So that explains why you.
So I'm a Dacker, and that's why my imprint is Dacker Music.
There you go. I'm glad you did that. It's also why you hike in the woods all the time, apparently, right?
What's that?
you That's also why you hike in the woods all the time, and in
Yes,
this case, the mountains of the Cascades. So,
yes.
a hiker, graduate, master's and doctoral degrees in composition from, excuse me, Florida State University. Excuse me. Let me swallow. And your bachelor's degree in music education from Central College in Ohio or Iowa. Let me just take a drink of water. We're not going to start over. Okay, now I think I'm going. So let's start over again. Your master's degree and doctor's degree in composition from Florida State University, and your bachelor's degree in music education from Central College. And
Yes.
that's in Ohio or Iowa.
Iowa.
Iowa. Sorry, I always get that messed up.
Four-letter states.
And in 1983, you were given whatever honor, the Distinguished Alumnus Award or something.
from 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 Central College. Yes.
Was it a paperweight? What?
Well, it took me really by surprise, but that they chose to honor me as a distinguished alumnus based on my work in composition,
Nice.
not my work in teaching. So,
Okay, well that is a has been represents a wise decision. You know what I mean? They saw who you really are, I think. I hope I got out of that one.
I
And
very
among
much
you,
appreciated the honor. I was very surprised, and
that's
I'm still
great.
not sure why they chose me, but I'm
That's
glad they
great.
did.
And you did have studied with some composers, John Boda, Charles Carter, and Carlisle Floyd. I talked to you a little earlier. My favorite opera composer is, well, okay, there are others, but Carlisle Floyd. Of Mice and Men, I saw it in Seattle. Devastating, absolutely devastating. Brilliant composer.
Yeah, he
And we're going
was,
to talk about
and I learned
influences.
so much from him. Let me tell you.
I'll bet. And we're gonna talk about influences when we start speaking about some of your music. I enjoyed reading your written journey. Your introduction page is just so personable that I thought I'd ask you to tell us all the story once more because it isn't particularly unique. It's us. It's most all of us. Frankly, go. It's your turn.
Okay, well, it's my life story, huh? In
Well, so
25
you know what I
years.
mean, the beginnings, and the importance of things like high school bands, for example, stuff like that.
Well, as a kid, I started out being a fan of Elvis and other pop recording artists of the time, and then my brother was a classical music fan, and he had some classical albums. And when he went up, he was 11 years older than me. So when he went off to the Navy, I started listening to those, and my preference soon went from Elvis to Elgar, and
By the way, funny you mentioned Elgar.
immediately.
Well, funny you mentioned Elgar. We'll talk. I've got a frog in my throat. Go ahead, keep the story going while I
Okay,
sip water.
in school, I wanted to be in the band. That was the only thing that was available. It was band. They had no orchestra. They had chorus, but I initially wasn't interested in that. Although the band teacher taught both because it was a very small school.
Yeah, I've heard that story before. Yep.
Yeah, it was like the town I grew up in had 350 year-round residents.
Wow. I've lived in a hamlet of about that population, and I'm amazed they had any school of any kind anywhere near.
Yeah. Anyway, I started out on the trumpet, lasted 2 years on that, and was switched to the horn.
Of
But
necessity, right? He said to
normal,
you, right? Is that the same thing? It's like we really need a horn player. How about we
yeah,
switch you over to horn, right?
yeah, yeah. My band director talked me into it. He didn't tell me how hard it was.
They never do.
I soon learned that playing that instrument is like walking on a greased tightrope. But
Yep.
I stuck with it, and that's the instrument I still play today. Anyway, I got interested in composition just because I always seemed to have a creative bent. I started out thinking I wanted to be an artist, and I was drawing pictures as soon as I could hold a pencil. And then I decided I wanted to try writing, so I wrote little stories before I could even write. dictate them, and my mom would write them down for me.
But that's important. The idea that you've got writing in your blood. Go ahead.
Yeah, but eventually I decided I didn't really have much aptitude for either of those, and music was really taking a hold of me. And my dad was a very gifted musician. He was totally self-taught. He'd never had a music lesson in his life, but he had perfect pitch, and he could play the banjo and the guitar, and he was really a good singer, and he could teach himself to play just about any instrument at all. And I actually learned as much from him about my cornet when I was first starting out, which he hadn't learned it. He just taught himself to play it, and then he helped teach me. I learned as much from him as I did from my band teacher at school.
Wow.
So he put this passion for music in me, and that stuck with me. And eventually, I decided I was going to major in music, and I didn't know where. I thought about going to the big music schools in New York State, and soon found out that they were totally out of reach financially. Like Eastman and Juilliard or New England Conservatory over in Boston were the ones that I thought about.
I auditioned at Eastman and failed miserably. Go ahead. But it
But
was a great experience, honestly.
I figured on somebody. I didn't have really good background. I didn't have much piano skill because there was no piano teacher in my little town, and there was no piano in my house anyway.
Yeah.
So I never really had real piano. Although my parents did see that I needed a piano in my teenage years, and they bought me one, but I kind of had to teach myself how to play it, and I never really had real lessons until I was in college, and then just enough to pass piano proficiency
Thank
to
you.
major in music.
By the way, thank you because we have identical stories. In my case, the piano was always there, and I hated it. And then at college, there was a piano proficiency test at one of the colleges in Los Angeles I was going to, California State University Northridge. And it was so horrifying, scared me so much because my piano skills to this day are just awful, that I went to Cal Arts because there was no piano proficiency test required there. So,
Mm-hmm.
we are simpatico. We understand these crises that come up in our lives. Anyway, sorry for interrupting again.
Anyway, Central College didn't have a composition major. Um, if you went there, you majored in music education, basically,
Sure. Yeah.
instrumental stress, and I had to give a horn recital as a senior. So I taught middle and high school band in a little town in rural Iowa for 2 years, and then I decided I wanted more composition teaching, so I started looking for schools, and I ended up going to Florida State to study with Carlisle Floyd, the opera composer.
Mm.
And after I graduated from that, I still didn't have any piano skills, and I knew that I wouldn't make it as a composition teacher at the college level, so
Mm.
I really didn't even try to get a college job. Also, didn't want to go just anywhere I could get hired, so I decided to move to Texas, where there's a big market for arranging, and I went there to be an arranger. And for several years, I worked on arranging mostly for marching band, but also for some small stage productions.
Hmm. And by the way, those are very tricky. It's not easy stuff. These huge shows, marching band shows, and the music that's
Tell
written
me about it.
for them. It's amazing. Yeah. Okay.
And
It's all-
got tired of that. Moved to Albuquerque, New Mexico, where I kept on arranging, but I also decided to go back to teaching there, and that's where I had most of my teaching years, teaching both high school and middle school band.
Well, at least you were in a bigger city, so the high school band
Yes.
presumably was reasonably rewarding.
Yeah.
And I want to remind everybody, because Rick and I had the chat, but I have had 12 years in Seattle conducting a fabulous wind ensemble, really really talented kids. They were like high school and college level, 60, 70 players from all over the high schools and colleges in that area. And I love really serious concert, wind orchestra music. So I just want to make sure that all you out there know that I'm very, very simpatico to that whole genre. It's wonderful. And we'll talk later about where it may have limitations to color and instrumentation
Hmm.
and so on, which is okay. Okay, sorry. Once again, I interrupted you.
So I wrote a lot of arrangements and compositions for my own students while I was teaching.
Sure.
I published a few of them with trade publishers, but I never really thought about um, disseminating them to a wider market while I was teaching. I eventually ended up in Portland, Oregon.
Nice. I like that town. Go ahead.
Yeah, and I taught there for I think 3 years, and then because of my wife's job, moved up to Gig Harbor, Washington.
Oof. Love it.
Was there 2 years, and then finally made it to Everett, where I am now, and I've been here for like 16 years.
Oh, really? That long? Nice.
Yeah.
Nice. Well, we mentioned a little earlier your interest for a while, your capacity as a writer. Let's face it, even if you write your own biography, it's tough. So I'm complimenting on you that, but you solved the problem by marrying your wife. Now tell me a little bit about your wife, because we're leading up to something that's on this CD.
Um, well, I have to admit, she was my third wife. I don't really like to talk about my marital history, but
That's fine.
the the spouse that figures into Paisano Suite was
There
number
you go.
two. That was in Texas,
I see. Oh, so. I see. I understand. Yeah. But she was
and
the writer. Yeah, I get it.
yeah,
And we'll talk about it, but I want you to tell me about Paisano Suite in great detail because it shows uh, in the sounds that I heard.
yeah.
Okay, I
Uh,
guess I've made us all mortified and embarrassed and uncomfortable. So let's.
well, oh, let me finish
Oh, okay, okay,
where I
sure.
was, and when I moved from Gig Harbor to Everett, that's when I decided to retire from teaching and went into writing full time, and that's when I started really seriously writing and seriously uh, trying to distribute my music, and I quickly learned that self publishing is a much more forgiving way to go
Hmm.
than trade publishers, because with a trade publisher, even if they accept it, it's like 2 years between when it gets accepted and you sign a contract and it actually hits the market. And with self-publishing, you not only get a bigger royalty, but you write it and you print it out in PDF format,
Sure.
send it to your distributors, and it's available right away.
Yeah, bingo, like as in your dackermusic.com site,
Yeah,
which I'll
that
put up
music.
on the website because again, I had a nice browse. I thought the pieces and then recordings of them. I presume in terms of the band pieces, were those any of your groups at all, or what? Any recollection? I'm assuming a lot of those bands were from all over different places, maybe. Wonderful playing, by the way.
Yeah, no, they were mostly those. Some of them were actually virtual studio
Oh, really? Nice,
playbacks, and
nice.
the ones that were live were university bands mostly.
I see, I
Oh,
see.
a few were by community bands,
Hmm.
adult bands.
Wonderful. Okay, now let's, and as we've mentioned, your two instruments were trumpet and horn, uh, um, and this writing thing. I think it's time to move into the pieces because I have so much to say about what I just said about trumpet and horn. The writing is unbelievable. I mean, really, it's your writing, and I told you this earlier. I put the CD on, and I just want to tell you, within 3 or 4 notes of Voices of the Night, the first piece, I fell right into your rabbit hole. Which is to say, here are my notes. This is Voices of the Night, Nocturnal Fantasy for Orchestra. And the title for this composition, you say in your note, is taken from a poem by Henry Wadsworth Longfellow. Hello, writing, literature, poetry. I know where you're coming from. You read books. The following excerpt serves as an epigraph to the score from
Yes.
from Longfellow. All forms of sorrow and delight, all solemn voices of the night that can soothe thee or affright.
Right.
And that's a tricky little piece of poesy because there's that warning. It sounds so lovely, or it can, really soothe you, or it can scare you to death even in the night. Here's what I have to say, and then I want you to just talk about this and its history, how it evolved. This piece, Voices of the Night. As I said, here I go. I'm just going to read the stream of consciousness stuff at you. Later, I'll try and sort it all out in the review. But bam, I like the orchestration immediately. The colors, and what that means, from my point of view, is you know how to make colors. You know what I mean? Or I'm telling you stupid things, frankly, but just so everybody knows, it's not easy to make colors happen. The choice of instruments and so on. So from the get-go, all I say to myself repeatedly is the colors, the colors, the colors. It's a huge compliment. And there's something else. I think we've mentioned maybe off camera. There's some of your modalities tend a little bit dark, tend a little bit on the minor or modal side, which is fine if they're used properly. And my example is I have been through other composers who have no way of getting out. Once they get stuck, and it becomes this circular nightmare. Not in your case. Every single thing, this is what blew me away. Just in the first piece, I like the orchestration, just in the first piece, Voices of the Night. The narrative, your musical narrative is believable. Your sense of where you are in that narrative is solid. Now, just so everybody's clear, I'm using sort of literary words really, but musical narrative is crucial. If a composer has no understanding of where she is and where she is going, there is a muddle. There is no muddle in this piece at all. And also, I love, and yes, I heard your use of winds and percussion as banderly, if that even exists as a word, because there are those colors. And if you've written concert band music, you know what I mean, those kind of brass and wind colors. I can't figure
Well,
it out.
you also already know that there's a version of that piece for concert band,
I do.
as well as the orchestral version.
I do indeed. But I think actually the thing is, you're an orchestral composer. You know how to work with strings beautifully. Let me find another couple things. We're still in Voices of the Night. It's what, 7, 8 minutes? I can't quite remember, something like that. Is it more?
More
I
than
think
nine.
it is. Yeah, let me.
Nine.
Yeah, it's nearly 10, 9.5 minutes.
Nine and change.
But this business of using orchestral color to construct moods and messages, you're a master, okay? And again, as I said earlier, it's easy to get lost uh, in things if you don't know what you're doing and where you're going. And here's what I have. It's going somewhere. It's not lost. Things are getting dense, complex. I still love his instrumentation sense, your sense of instrumentation. It's wonderful. And the details of your instrumentation may even harken back to band music a little bit, because I heard lovely use of percussion, of mallet percussion and whatnot, that isn't often used certainly in the way you use it in this orchestral piece and others. So you've got this wonderful capability these capabilities that you use wonderfully in both contexts, if that made any sense to me. To you, it may not have made sense to me either. The rhythmic pulse is wonderful. And that's important. If things don't keep moving, as you know, so that's what I mean about you're doing this. There's a new section, rhythmic, more tonal and tuneful, and this also amazes me about your pieces. We'll get to Paisan in a minute, but these are voices. Just as the first example, Voices of the Night is serious, fascinating, interesting, complex contemporary music. And you, I don't know how you do it. You caress tonality, I guess is the way I'm trying to describe. You sort of just as things are getting, there's this caressing. There's a tonal something or other that happens, or quasi-tonal, however you want to describe it, that just goes and then you do other interesting stuff, and then there's another caress that gets your audience gives your audience a little bit of a caressing. That's the way I see it. Again, over and over again, I keep being impressed by the sensibility of your compositional technique. And you have a PhD. I feel like an idiot saying this to you. You know perfectly well what I'm talking about. That's the training. You know what you're doing. And
I had a good teacher.
and yeah, Carlisle Floyd, among
yeah,
others.
he's the best.
And also, you have. Speaking of Carlisle Floyd, there is his kind of. I'm not saying imitative. I'm saying his kind of American vibe, if that makes any sense to you. If any of that kind of rubbed off from your training with him, maybe that's what I hear occasionally. There's something that's kind of, I don't know, 50s, 60s, the good times of American music, as in Carlisle Floyd, in your writing. So if his training is part of what I'm hearing, it's very American, very wonderful. Again, orchestration. Really, really nice mastery of orchestration. I just love it when composers know, as I've said ad nauseum, when composers know how to catch color, how to catch the magic of color in orchestration, and make colors move and change and be interesting. So this piece is very, very interesting. Your turn. What do you have to say about it? Give me a little news about Voices of the Night, Nocturnal Fantasy for Orchestra.
Well, it was originally written way back in the 70s and shelved. I didn't even copy the parts because I knew there was no chance of having it performed. And sometime around 2017 or thereabouts, I brought it and Expansions. They were both written about the same time, and they were both put in the drawer.
Sorry, I've got a cat here causing trouble.
Oh, I've got one here too. She might start piping up here.
Okay, good. That'll make me feel better. Oh, come on, cat. She's very, very old, so there's the.
Mine is 21.
Really? Mine's about 19. So they're, you know how they can create scenes.
Oh yeah.
Anyway, sorry. Go ahead. Remember where you were.
Anyway, so it didn't have a very interesting name, so I started asking some friends, and I made a VST recording of it. Well, first of all, I had to transcribe it because the original had been written obviously by hand because we didn't have Finale then. And so I transposed it onto Finale and made a VST recording of it. And I asked some friends to listen to it. And one of them suggested Nocturnal Fantasies, and I liked that.
Mm-hmm.
But another one, I even forgot now what his suggestion was, but in talking about it, he said it certainly conveys the voices of the night. And my ears perked up. That's my title.
Bingo.
So
I confess I did not hear frogs. I think you mentioned in your notes something about in the opening something about nighttime and frogs. But
when I wrote it, I didn't really change it very much when I revised it, and the frogs. There's a little da da motif that comes in during the slow section. Anyway, So I thought that's a really good title. I bet it's been used before. So I started looking, and then I found the Longfellow poem,
You know,
and I read
serendipity.
that and said, okay, I like this. So I found where he actually used the phrase "voices of the night" in the poem, and I lifted that and made an epigraph out of it.
You're reminding me of where I am at the moment. I'm writing program notes for the Santa Barbara Symphony, and they're my first ever program notes for a whole season. And what I'm saying, trying to say, is what the serendipity of things, which is I've created the conceit that I know what the conductor is up to. That was my first mistake. But it has gotten me into this whole thing where I'm really looking at how at the sub basement and sub basement of just even the arc of an entire program, and it's exactly that. Something clicks, something starts to be interesting, and then you can start looking there, and before you know it, you're on some other level, strictly serendipitously. That these things just happen, and by the time you're done with that kind of stream of consciousness, I guess, journey of some sort, you got yourself a piece or a better understanding. Is that, am I close or am I just mouthy here?
Pretty much. Um, as far as the program is concerned, it didn't have a program, and once I had a title, I started thinking, well, how can I make this thing? It just seemed to work. So I wrote a program to go with it,
There you go.
which is in the notes on the CD. And
So so the program note came after the sounds.
the music came first, and the little program that goes with it came later.
Exactly.
Yes.
Exactly. Wonderful, wonderful piece. Again, that just you hooked me
Thank
on that first piece because of the high level of composition at orchestration. That got me right away. Okay.
you.
Now let's look at the Concerto for Clarinet and Chamber Orchestra. Another marvelous piece. And this, I think, hang on, let me go up here. Who's the orchestra? It's the Janacek Philharmonic with I hope I can pronounce it properly, Stanislav at least Mavrinek. It's probably wrong, conductor, but Karol Donal is the clarinetist, and
Yeah.
that I hope I got close pronouncing his name properly. But that man, that is just a gorgeous, elegant clarinet sound. And how did, as a composer, how did he go into these things nervously? Like, oh my God, is this clarinetist going to be able to do it? Tell me about this concerto.
Well, it was originally written in 1973 as my Doctor of Music dissertation at Florida State, and I worked with a really good clarinetist who was a local guy on the faculty of Florida A&M, which is another university in Tallahassee, and so he made sure that I didn't write anything unplayable for the clarinet, since that's not my instrument.
Is he the one that said this is the second hardest concerto outside of the Carl Nielsen concerto?
Yes.
Which I know very well also. I don't believe it. Anyway, go ahead.
um, anyway, uh, after he played it at Florida State, it was I just didn't think it would ever see the light of day again. So I just kind of forgot about it for 4 decades, and then in 2012 I decided, I should bring that thing out and get reacquainted with it and see what it, if it's worth doing anything with. And so I brought it out, and I decided, yeah, the first movement needs a lot of work. Uh, I hear some stuff there that doesn't ring true. And the second and third movements just maybe a little sprucing up, but they're pretty well ready to go. So the first movement, it's a complex experimental hybrid between arch form and sonata allegro form. And it, it took me 2 years of working on that to get it to where I was finally satisfied with it.
Well, that
And
makes sense.
yeah,
73, I hardly even remember 1973, and I was a mere child conducting even. So
Yeah,
when I look back at it, I think, how could I possibly have had any idea what I was doing? And of course, I didn't.
yeah. The notes I wrote for it, which you can hear on the Navona Records page for that piece,
Mhm.
is, is pretty much the story of how I dug it out of the dustbin of academic obscurity, as I call it, and tried to make a viable piece out of it.
Well, let me give you anything else before I sort of run through my stream of consciousness notes.
That's pretty much it.
Okay. Once again, and by the way, it's quite mysterious and complicated. I'm looking at the first movement, which is exactly right. Quite mysterious and complicated. Again, I love his sense of orchestration. This is just a mastery. It's really throw doubt out out the window, okay?
I
Because
did a lot of reorchestrating during my
good.
revision process.
Yeah, but I'm saying that all your life you have this for sure gift of orchestration. You know color. That's ad nauseum. I'm going to say this to you, and that is very very unique. I think even amongst composers that to understand color, which kept me interested throughout the entire CD. But okay, first movement of the concerto. I say to myself, it's definitely 70s. You know what I mean? You remember the 70s? I do. There was something
Yeah,
kind of dysfunctional or jagged or I don't know what it's at the end of the Vietnam War or something horrible. There's just a kind of an oppressive something about the 70s in general. So I thought I recognized something about that, something 70s about it. Complicated, troubled writing, but again, the instrumentation, the various bits for various instruments, makes it all work nicely. And that is no easy trick. Dramatic bit with trombones. Somewhere in that first movement, I remember this dramatic use of trombones, trumpet, nice color again, and now other stuff going on. Clarinet riding the moment, involved in all of it. And I love the way the clarinet, the solo instrument, just weaves in and out of all these textures. She it is part of the whole process. You know what I mean? As opposed to bum 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 and then bum 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 bum.
yeah,
It's not that kind of a concerto at all. It's wonderfully integrated. How's that? And yet the soloist is clear.
integrated. That's a good word. Yeah,
Okay, and yet the soloist is clearly the soloist. He's clearly the protagonist, making her way. I hate to be so gender inaccurate. His or her way through. The narrator is the clarinet is making their way through this interaction with the orchestra. It's wonderful. I love the way you use piano percussively in this movement. I see the note, but you use it you use the instrument, the piano as a percussive instrument, very very interestingly. And in a little later in another piece, I recall, not even using the instrument as a percussive instrument, but it's there for as a color. We'll get there, I hope. Let's see. Okay, I guess I've pretty much run that one out. The Adagio Cadenza. You want to tell me about that, and then I'll tell you.
the Adagio is a nothing experimental about that. It's a straight up ABA form, and it ends, but it doesn't end. It builds into this big cluster chord, which cuts off, leaving the solo clarinet to play a cadenza. I say I took a page from Copland for that, linking the slow movement to the
To the
to the
last movement.
finale
Yeah,
with a cadenza and otherwise no break.
very very good. It works beautifully.
Yes,
You know.
and then the cadenza is basically a sonata rondo with some elements of theme and variations tossed in for fun.
Thank you for that, Professor. Let's see. What do I have to say about it? Where am I here? The Adagio, yeah, the Adagio Cadenza. As you have just said, the clarinet cadenza moves into the third movement, Allegro più Allegro. It's a good pace, interesting stuff as always. I say to myself, clarinet and orchestra enter into punctuated dialogue. Is the way I described it, at least for now in the sort of stream of consciousness notes. hey, guess what? Here's what I say once again. Love the orchestration again. Color, color, color. So, you're home free as far as I'm concerned. That's the magic. Color is everything in
Yeah.
orchestral pieces.
If I didn't want color, I'd just write for piano.
There's kind of a newish section. It's a sort of dancerly tune, is what I have in my notes. There's a bit of a dance or maybe even folkish implication tune. I think you slap me down here if I'm running off at the mouth about things you're saying. That's ridiculous. I didn't do anything of the kind. Some wonderful orchestral passages now. Clarinet again. This interchange. A piece is full of ideas and they're all nicely put together. Now, how can you fail? Great ideas, nicely put together. That's it. This walking tune again, punctuated by low brass. I'm just trying to give an overview of what I experienced. Well written, wonderful understanding of all sections of the orchestra.
Thank you.
Because you can't use color if you don't know what you're doing with these sections of the orchestra. So maybe high school and junior high band helped. You probably had to do a lot of inventive stuff to make things work. Um, just let's see what else. Anything else before I become too repetitive? Wonderful ending of the concerto. At the very end, big clarinet, solo clarinet tone, and then this diminuendo and out. Very, very clever, I thought.
Yeah, kind of got that idea from Mendelssohn's Hebrides Overture.
Aha! Uh, what's that called? It's not plagiarism, it's inspiration.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. All right.
It's
Uh,
very different, but big ending, and then it,
yeah,
it
that's
ends
wonderful.
quietly.
It's wonderful, wonderful.
I
Um,
guess Dvorak does that in the New World Symphony too.
you're mentioning all the pieces I've just written program notes for. So anyway, uh, let's now look at this Paisano suite, and you're going to tell me the story after I kind of give you what I think I did off camera. What is partially really, really interesting about this CD of your music, entirely your music, is is the contrasts, I guess, really, because Paisano Suite is just completely different from everything else. Thoroughly tonal, yeah. In what nine or 8 or 9 movements, pastorale,
Eight movements.
eight
Eight movements.
versus,
Runs about 20 minutes total.
scherzo, prelude, and they're little movements. And I thought when I went into it that these would be connected somehow, that it would be one suite that would have these movements connected. No, they're perfect, gorgeous little gems. Each and every one of these little movements ends perfectly. This suite needs to be performed a whole lot more because it's so accessible to the public. That's what I'm thinking, and I'll pass that on to folks out there who are, as you know, a lot of college faculty, and do I have any high school people? I'm not sure. Um, hang on just a second. Let me get through this. I guess I didn't highlight my notes here, but why don't you now give us this story because the character is completely different and it's totally where you were.
Yeah, it's
Sorry, phone, clock.
the clock. um, yeah,
Between the
there's
cat and the clock, what can I say?
quite a story that goes with that. In 1982, I had two lucky breaks come my way, and this is how I begin the notes to the piece and the album. Um, First, I got a commission from the Austin Bell. I was living in Austin, Texas at the time, and I got a commission from the Austin Ballet Theater to compose a new ballet because they had done a previous ballet of mine the year before, and they wanted another one. So they commissioned one, got a grant from the city, and I they didn't give me any idea what they wanted. So they just gave me free rein. So I said, okay. My previous ballet had been a story, more or less, um, with definite characters. This one's going to be abstract. So I thought, okay, I'm going to write several dances, movements, and each one is going to be a musical form. So I started with a prelude, which I actually envisioned would be danced to, but he actually used it as a real prelude. He just had it with the curtain closed. And the second movement was a kind of a scherzo. I called it scherzo. Third movement was a berceuse, lullaby. Fourth movement was a fugue, a real honest to goodness fugue. And the fifth movement, I believe, is
Pastoral.
Pastorella. And sixth was caprice, light dancey thing. And the seventh movement was the pas de deux for the ballet. And
The
I call it
romanza. The romanza
yeah.
was the positive.
And the finale I just called finale. And they were all dances, and they all had different costumes and different choreography, but they weren't trying to tell any particular story. And it was originally written for a small, very small pit orchestra, uh, strings, piano, and a woodwind quintet, and that was the orchestra. And there was one other movement, which I can't even remember what it was now because I didn't use it in the suite. Um, so after that performance in 1982, I put it away, didn't do anything with it.
You've got a bad attitude. Go
Uh,
ahead.
I tend to do that a lot. And then decades later, I drag them out and rewrite them. So I pulled that out and decided, okay, I'm going to make a concert suite out of this. So I ditched one of the movements and reorchestrated the rest of it for a full orchestra. And the original title of the thing was balabale, which is a term specific to dance music. I didn't name it; the choreographer did. And
Hmm.
I had written it at, oh, I didn't tell you what the second lucky break was. Um,
Here it comes.
yeah,
I've read this note. That's what I'm waiting for.
it was written at a place called the Paisano Ranch, which is a ranch out in the hill country out west of Austin, which used to belong to the Texas writer and folklorist J. Frank Dobie, and now it's for many years it's been used as a retreat or residence for the winners of a fellowship named after him, the Dobie Paisano Fellowship. It's only open to writers, but here's where the other wife comes in. She was a writer, a really good writer, a poet, and she won the fellowship. And so
Bingo.
we got to live at the ranch for 6 months. Well, the 6 months happened to coincide with the time that I needed to be writing this ballet. So the whole ballet score was written at Paisano, and I guess it was probably the only music ever written there because the fellowship isn't open to composers, and how many writers are going to show up with a composer's spouse in tow? So I left a copy. All the writers always leave a copy of their book there. So I left a copy of my score there with a little preface explaining why this musical score is there and telling the story of it. So that's how it came to be. And then decades later in 2012, I reorchestrated it, made a concert suite out of it, and I didn't know what to name it after, and then I just went, duh, Paisano. It was written at Paisano. Name it Paisano Suite. That's got a nice ring to it. If anybody doesn't know what Paisano means, they can look it up. It's the
Well,
Spanish word for road runner. It also means,
I was
it has
thinking,
another meaning, but
I,
I don't remember
well,
what it's
I was
about.
thinking Italian, as in paisano. That's
Yeah,
where that's how I walked into the piece today. I thought paisano. What? Now it's in Italian. What? I had it totally wrong. Period.
yeah,
Okay.
it's there's a lot of road runners, the bird there, and Dobie named his ranch Paisano. And there is another Spanish name, somebody who speaks Spanish better than I can remember. It's either orphan or wanderer or something like
Huh.
that.
Ah, interesting. Well, here's what hit me immediately. A, it's totally tonal, if you will. I mean,
Pretty
by
much. Yeah. Not
comparison to
totally, but pretty much.
yeah, by comparison to the other pieces. And I had read your note, and I've had a couple years with Seattle Festival Ballet, once upon my youth, and so right away I got the ballet, the dance connection by the way it's written, by the pacing, by the meter, by all of that, and of course it's beautiful dancerly music, each of these little movements. But what I really took away from this was your experience at Paisano, and I'm glad you mentioned Rolling Hills, because in my notes here, well, I just luckily came on one. Now we're talking tonal music. I say to myself, I'm looking at the scale, so it's almost English. Speaking of who were you speaking of earlier in terms of influences? Not Vaughan Williams, but I used the idea in my own mind. This
Well, Williams is one of my favorite composers, so
okay.
he's
Well,
going to show up in my music from time to time.
the folk song suites, the rolling hills of England. I mean something, but just
Yeah, I mentioned Elgar
there
earlier,
you
but
go.
because it alliterates with Elvis.
But English. That's what I took away from this. This was like an English countryside, if you will. I'm not saying that was my impression. I'm just saying that I saw something about that.
It's the Texas Hill Country, which I guess is like English
Uh-huh.
countryside.
And also just your use again of orchestration and so on. There was a little very English something in there about the way you
Yeah,
assemble the instruments that was very very English, which is good. Okay, uh, horn solo, fiddle opens. This is in the Berceuse. I mean, in the scherzo, as I mentioned, we're talking about this. What I'm really getting is you spent 6 months of being massaged psychically and everything from that countryside retreat, as far as I can tell from what I heard. It's gloriously idyllic music.
yeah, it's actually based on a very modest amount of musical material.
You mentioned
It's
that.
it's got a lot of theme and variation type stuff between the different movements. You'll hear echoes of the movements in each other.
Makes sense for a suite of short movements to somehow link to one another. Makes perfect sense. Let's see, what have I got here? I didn't quite underline these, so I'm having a little trouble. Oh, and again, based on your experience with the hardest instrument on the earth outside of violin, I'm speaking of French horn, which, by the way, never is predictable. Period. Correct? Never. You never know
Right.
when it's going to mess with
I've heard some of the best horn players in the world
you.
um, have clams, clunkers.
But anyway, you use horn here very nicely, and horn is England as far as I'm concerned. I mean, so again, a color that bespeaks. I've been waiting to use that word for years now. A color, an orchestral color that bespeaks, the English countryside. French horn, nice. Um, let's see. I see here. I say very tonal. Yikes! So tonal. Lovely. I'm speaking of the Pastoral, of course. That movement was beautiful. The Romanza is wonderful. The finale is nice. That little off the string beginning that gives it sort of. It is, isn't it? Off the string, that string stuff down there. I hear that rhythm.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. That's just, and of course, off the string, it makes it brighter and more movable, more forward moving, as far as I can tell over the years. It's a nice clip, setting the whole thing up as forward moving motif, if you will. The whole suite, I say to myself, is kind of old-fashioned in a sweet American music of the 40s, 50s kind of way, and that's kind of where I kept not only just hearing sort of that English countryside feel, but something that just took me back to Carlisle Floyd, if you will, and others from that period, and Havanas. I mentioned Havanas a couple of times, and in terms of just it's not you know, and I know, and
Mm.
everybody out there knows, but we're not talking about
Yeah, you
imitation.
can occasionally hear him in my.
We're just talking influences. The
Yeah.
influences that stick with you that cause a creative person to move in a certain direction. Now, I'm ready for the last piece. expansions for orchestra. And you told me tonight, I thought it was an orchestra. Straighten me out here again. It was the band piece entitled Expansions, which I listened to, but just for a little bit. That's why I'm in trouble. Is a completely different piece
It's a
from.
completely different
Okay.
composition. Yeah, like I said, there's a band version of Voices of the Night, and that's the same music, just
That's.
with different
So you
orchestrations.
got me on that one. Yeah.
But the and there's a couple other pieces I have that do that too. But the expansions for winds and percussion and expansions for orchestra, while they're sort of companion compositions, they are each different composition. They have the same basic form, starting with a few little motifs and expanding them into a full blown composition. But even within the same form, they're very different.
Very different. Well, I'm
Yeah.
glad we got that straightened out because my question before you and I talked a
Well,
little bit before the thing
very
was,
different,
is this the 75
except
band
for the
version?
fact that they're both atonal.
Fair enough. And by the way, this really is quite a challenging piece on this CD. Of the pieces on the CD, this one is expansions for orchestra is maybe the toughest, if you will, from accessibility or something. And by the way, I remembered something in the piece that's some bassoon writing, and I thought to myself, that's euphonium. But that was when I was still under the impression that they might be one and the same piece.
You
Um,
know, I've never used euphonium in the orchestra. Maybe I should.
well, I was thinking, why not?
Pretty
Because
good idea.
that's what I thought I was actually. I knew I wasn't hearing euphonium, but I thought that's that sound, that euphonium sort. There's a bassoon line in there that's just kind of just took me right to euphonium somehow.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, you mentioned color in my work,
yeah.
and that's what the expansions is all about. It's all about color. It's
Lots of
not
tuned
really not
timpani.
really thematic or developing the
Yeah,
theme
no, quite right.
stuff. It's mostly about color,
Yeah,
texture, and color.
and again, it's not color and effect and texture for no good reason. I'm thinking this is I think the only piece on this CD that uses this, tuned timpani that you pitch up after while you're playing. There are those moments, right? Okay, good, good, good. So far,
Yeah,
I'm okay. Um,
hit the timpani and put
and
down the
then do
pedal and
yeah.
go. Vroom.
And it's not. And again, what I want to assure you about in terms of orchestration is there's nothing um, peripheral about anything you do. Okay, so when I heard those wonderful timpani tunings, and I can't, it's called something, but you know what I'm talking about.
Glissandi,
Pardon?
timpani glissandi.
Okay, yeah, nice, very well. Um, I knew that I sensed and knew immediately that this was for a purpose. And again, the way you mix colors, even that timpani glissando, or glissandi, as you say, they fit perfectly in the moment of that that they're required for. I don't know that I made any mention of that, but that's what I'm trying to get at. Uh, Lots of material in the lower registers. And I say to myself, it's a little depressing. Where? Straighten me out here, or did I go down the wrong rabbit hole? Then things begin to build, as per the title. Motives run through ever larger, thicker orchestration. This is the first piece on the CD that is really has this enormous, frankly, power, this huge expansion in the orchestration. Cohesive messaging, um, lots of color, lots of color. I'd say something about string effects from the 70s, and I can't quite remember what that might imply. It's out of my mind at the moment. And then I say, now the beast is building. I'm talking about the last bits. Stravinsky-like.
Yeah,
Correct me.
one of my
Okay.
he's one of my go-to influences.
And whatever that means, but somehow it was Stravinsky-like. The ending toward a big crash ending. The last chord in brass is interesting, very interesting. That last chord in brass, and then, which I think is really almost a sign of what do you call that? A signature of yours, fades out once again. Yeah, kind of just dissipates, if you will, which is
Yeah,
always
Voice-
powerful effect. Go ahead. Sorry.
Voices of the Night and that were written about the same time, and so I was kind of into that build up to a big noisy climax and then fade away. So I did it with both of them.
It's
But
very
that makes for good bookends for the
yeah,
program on the album.
yeah. Well, anyway, this is a, what else you want to say? I think we've been through everything. I'm just what have I forgotten to ask you or talk about, and then I'm going to do a little recap.
Oh, I don't have anything that I particularly need to add.
Okay. Okay. Well, this I really was looking forward to this interview and to listen to your CD, Rick, because you know you and I met as per the way the world is going these days. It has to have been months ago when we kind of started to get
Hmm.
together about this, and then one thing and another, and it's common, and as I mentioned, I put it in a stack, and then when the day comes, I pull it out and say, okay, my day is with you. Wonderful surprises. I guess that's the biggest thing. Wonderful, wonderful surprises. Very, very good surprises. And again, I think, what am I trying to say? Well, you have bad attitude. And for good reason, which is I know plenty of composers, especially when it comes to operas. You know, you put your life into something for 3 years, you create a wonderful opera. I'm thinking of a colleague of mine. Uh, it's performed at the college a couple times and then disappears for all
Yeah.
tons of reasons, including the cost. But it just so much music is being written. But I thought, yeah, bad
Speaking of
attitude,
opera,
huh?
speaking of opera, I've
Yeah.
got one coming out on Navona Records next month.
What's the title? What's it going to be about?
It's um, it's a chamber opera for two singers on O. Henry's The Gift to the Magi.
Oh, by the way, I love using American subject matter because
Mm.
American literature, American folk stories um, are so rich. They're just so rich, so wonderful. Okay, well, maybe we'll talk. First
It's
of all, I got to
mostly
get
it's mostly tonal too.
really well. That's. Have you given? You haven't given in. You're not compromising, right?
No,
Good. I was baiting you a little bit, but yeah, I think tonal opera is a very good idea, frankly. You know, in the 21st century, in the English language,
well,
telling a story.
most of my band music is tonal, most of it.
Yeah, which also makes sense. You know, but I
But
guess
considering who it's written for, which is for school musicians, they're not going to understand atonality very much.
that's right. No, that's
Although I do
quite right.
try to give them a
Well, I
little
checked in.
cue
I
time to.
looked at a couple of the grade five pieces. And there you really, I can't, was it a Rhapsody or something, but a real genuine, all by itself, standalone, wonderful piece for a wind band. So that was contemporary enough. But yeah, I mean, there are compromises, I think, if you will. They're not really, but you're suiting the market, if you will. How's that? Something like that. Well, that's good. I'm looking forward to that whole idea. And also, I like that you stick with an American topic instead of Ulysses or something crazy. Okay. Great chat in Everett with American composer Richard E. Brown, Rick Brown, about your 2022 Navona Records CD, Voices of the Night and Other Works for Orchestra. Um, all your music, just to be clear, that everyone is clear, of great treat and a wonderful surprise, really. And again, let me just say, you know color, you know orchestration, fabulous. When things make sense, everything moves forward. When especially in contemporary music, if the person is stuck in a whirlpool, we don't get anywhere. You know exactly where you're starting, where you're going, and where you're ending. Wonderful. Thanks very much.
Uh,
It's been fun
thank you, Dan.
chatting
I
with you.
appreciate the kind words.
Okay. All right. We'll see you. Bye.